Hey everyone, how's it going? Kevin here with Push to Talk. It is a lovely Thursday evening. I just finished work, and I wanted to sit down and knock out a video before Dark Side of the Ring starts because tonight's episode is about XPW, I believe, and that is a promotion I don't really know a whole lot about, so I'm really excited to watch this week's episode. So, I would like to knock this one out kind of quick, but at the same time, I want to spend some time with it and make sure it's good because this video is part of my series on the best AEW wrestlers. So if you saw my past couple of videos in this series, you will know that I have 5 points that I think make a great pro wrestler. Let's recap them, shall we? The first is in-ring ability. The second is psychology and logic. The third is audience connection. The fourth is storytelling and character. And the fifth is look. So on this episode or installment of my series, we're going to be talking about Bryan Danielson. We all know who he is, I think, I would hope. Whether you're a WWE fan or just an AEW fan, you know that Bryan Danielson or Daniel Bryan is probably one of the best wrestlers in the world today. Probably also one of the best wrestlers in the world of, honestly, I would say, like, the past 10 years. He's pretty incredible. He made a huge splash in WWE when he was there, and I think he's about to do the same in AEW. So as we know, he has a pretty long history as a professional wrestler. We've seen him in the independents before he was in WWE, most notably his work in Ring of Honor. We've also seen his kind of meteoric rise that happened in WWE, and now we're seeing for him for the first time on a major platform outside of the WWE, which is, as we know, AEW. I'm mostly exposed to Bryan Danielson's WWE stuff. I have watched a ton of his Ring of Honor stuff on YouTube as well, but I'm much more familiar with like what he did in the WWE, as I think most people are. I've seen him wrestle in person a few times in WWE. I saw him wrestle Brock Lesnar, actually, at the Survivor Series when Bryan Danielson was kind of playing that eco-warrior character. So that was a pretty cool match to see in person. And I must say, that was one of the only matches of that show that I actually really enjoyed. Before I get into the list, before I get into my points, rather, I just want to say, like, how absolutely stoked I am that Bryan Danielson is in AEW. I think he is the absolute perfect fit for AEW, especially with their emphasis on more, like, actual professional wrestling versus sports entertainment. AEW seems to focus much more on, like, in-ring action and in-ring matches than WWE does. And the AEW fan base absolutely adores Bryan Danielson. What's also really good about him coming to AEW is he, has that connection with the casual fan, in WWE. So it's good exposure for AEW having Bryan Danielson here. He's probably attracting more eyeballs to the product, especially like maybe some WWE fans who hadn't yet checked out AEW might be taking a look at it now with a different set of eyes now that Bryan Danielson's here. So all wins across the board for us as fans. He's also already put on absolute bangers of matches in AEW, most notably, obviously, with Kenny Omega. That's one of the best matches we've ever seen on AEW Dynamite. And for me personally, my favorite match that he's had since he's been in AEW was with Minoru Suzuki on kind of that, like, Rampage buy-in pre-show they had. I think it was last week. If you have not watched that match yet, I suggest that you go onto YouTube and you seek that out because it is free and you sit down and enjoy 20 minutes of absolutely incredible professional wrestling. That's one of my personal favorite AEW matches that we've seen so far. And if you love Minoru Suzuki like I do, it's an absolutely incredible match. So with all that aside, let's just go ahead and get into it. Let's get into my 5 points and apply them to Bryan Danielson. So starting with the first point is in-ring ability. I think this is pretty obviously Bryan Danielson's strongest point as a professional wrestler. It's hard to say anything here that hasn't already been said a million times before, but honestly, what has been said a million times before is 100% accurate. Bryan Danielson is one of the best professional wrestlers, in-ring wrestlers, in the entire world, and like I said, maybe even of the last 10 years. I think in 10 to 15 years from now, kids are going to talk about Bryan Danielson like how we talk about like HBK or Kurt Angle. He's just one of the great all-time in-ring performers. He has a huge moveset. He combines strikes, most notably the kicks that he does. He does grapples. And in those grapples, he uses MMA style grapples. He uses catch wrestling style grapples. He uses professional wrestling submissions as well. And he blends them all together really, really perfectly. Like in one sequence, you'll see him pull out submissions from various different styles of combat, right? He'll go from like an MMA hold into like something like a sharpshooter, right? He's just so fluid and just absolutely incredible in that sense. It's such a joy to watch. We even see him pull off things like suicide dives and, jumps off the top rope. So he really does kind of do it all. But to me, what really stands out is these strikes and submissions that he does. What really strikes me is how fluid his moves are used and put together. The way that he transitions from strikes to submissions to maybe like a suicide dive. It's just so masterfully fluid and put together. He's really incredible to watch, honestly. He's also a master at strong style, which we saw with Minoru Suzuki last week. So that's obviously bonus points for me. The next point that we have here is psychology and logic. So I think the brilliance of Bryan Danielson's psychology and logic is that it plays directly into his in-ring style. His matches are wrestling matches. They're really, really competitive most of the time. And obviously professional wrestling is meant to be perceived as a competitive sport, so it only makes sense that his matches would be competitive bouts. His timing and pacing during a match is near perfect. He's never too fast, he's never too slow. He knows how to space his moves out so they really sink into the viewer, and then at the same time, he knows when to ramp things up to build up that excitement. The next point that I'd like to apply to Bryan Danielson is his audience connection, and I think this is a pretty obvious one. I think yes is all that really needs to be said here, to be totally honest, but it goes beyond that, right? The audience adores Bryan Danielson. In WWE, they loved him because of how relatable he was. He didn't look like your prototypical Vince McMahon WWE wrestler. And he looked more like the everyman, and people were kind of into that. In AEW, the fans appreciate Danielson for his in-ring ability, obviously, so he has a really, really strong connection there. And, again, going back to WWE, just look at that whole yes movement that happened, right? People were so sick of the product and sick of the wrestlers they were seeing at that time. They just kind of naturally gravitated towards Bryan Danielson because he's a really relatable and likable guy. And because of this, that whole yes movement started, and he just blew up from that point. So he might be one of the best wrestlers to use as an example of someone who has really great audience connection. Just because, I don't know, it seems like it's just something that naturally occurs. You just kind of want to like this guy and get behind him. The next point here is storytelling and character. So Bryan Danielson is a pretty darn creative guy, I would say. He can work just as well as a heel as he can as a babyface. When he was in WWE, I absolutely loved his Eco Warrior gimmick that he had. I thought that was super creative and funny, and also pretty on the nose, to be quite frank. It was one of the best things that WWE had going for them at that time. It was such a great character. I loved how he came out with Rowan as kind of his big heater, and he wore the flannel, and he even had the Eco belt, like the hemp WWE belt. It was so well done and such a great character. Looking at him as a babyface, and to be honest here, I don't think he really needs to be any type of character. I think he just needs to be himself on TV, and people will just love him. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing, especially with him in AEW. This is something super, super unique about Bryan Danielson, and I think it's a big reason behind that whole yes movement that happened. He's just kind of a normal guy, but really, really likable. And his look, again, this is kind of something that just plays into the whole package with Bryan Danielson. He doesn't really need to have a unique look. His whole thing is just kind of like he's a normal guy who's just happens to be an absolutely incredible wrestler. Doesn't need anything over the top. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but that's perfect. That, again, fits right into him as a character and him as a wrestler. And, I don't think that his in-ring attire, even, for that matter, is anything particularly interesting or to write home about. It's just kind of like trunks and knee pads and kick pads and shoes, and that's about it. It's pretty standard stuff here. He's kind of thinking about this and putting together, like, his look and his character and his audience connection. He's kind of like the anti-US pro wrestler in a lot of ways. He doesn't have to be any of those crazy things. He's like just perfect as a normal person. It just really works and like so unique. I can't think of another instance where that's really a thing. Also, when talking about his look, I'm not going to lie. Growing up in the area where I grew up in, there is a lot of hippies. It's probably an offensive word to say now. I don't know. But a lot of like those, hippies. There's a lot of hippies. I don't know how else to put it. And I can speak from experience. His look is so spot on with like that modern kind of hippie look. I think it's super, super funny. And it was so perfect. And I would love to see the return of that eco warrior Bryan Danielson in AEW. I'd like to see how far he could push that in AEW and see what he could get away with. So fingers crossed, one day down the line, we kind of see the return of that eco warrior Bryan Danielson. I think that would be absolutely awesome. So looking at things as a whole, I think Bryan Danielson's top two traits as a pro wrestler are obviously his in-ring ability. He's probably one of the best in the world, maybe one of the best of all time. I mean, he's just so fluid. He has such a great variety of moves. Also his psychology and logic, which I think kind of plays into his in-ring ability, is just so perfect, such perfect timing, such perfect speed and rate of the match and knowing when to escalate things. He's a true, master inside of the ring that I think very, very few in the history of professional wrestling can even compare to. And obviously the second thing that I think really, really stands out when you look at Bryan Danielson, obviously, is that audience connection. Not many people in the history of WWE have really been able to pull that off, to really straight up cause a revolt of the fans, and have them buck the product in the way that they did at that time. To get behind them was truly something special and amazing, and is a huge testament to how relatable and how likable Bryan Danielson is, and how good of an audience connection he really has. I mean, you'll just go to any show and someone's on the mic and they'll ask a question and people will start answering with the yes thing, right? It's pretty incredible. Bryan Danielson is truly one of a kind when it comes to his audience connection. So that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about tonight. I kept this one pretty short, pretty sweet, because I really want to go watch Dark Side of the Ring, and I still got to edit this video and get it uploaded. So thanks for bearing with me on this one while I just kind of shotgun blast through it. I actually had a lot of fun recording this one. I liked talking about Bryan Danielson. I think he's a really, really great wrestler, obviously. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram. I am Push2Talk1. There you can see all of my photos of the AEW Unrivaled Series 7 that I just got, and a lot of photos of my kind of wrestling collection in general. I've got a lot of wrestling crap, and I really like to show it off. So go check me out there, and I will see you all probably tomorrow night for AEW Rampage. Oh, thank goodness. It's been weird not having it on Wednesday. So I'm stoked to get some AEW in this week. So I will see you all tomorrow night for that.